Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. I trust you had a great weekend. Cold weather has come now. It's really misty this morning. I'm going to pull out my overcoat. And there's sort of a couple of weeks of the year that you can actually pull your overcoat out in Nairobi. Macro thoughts. There was a very big move in currencies on Friday, and Nanex LLC, as ever, put up a great pictorial, and we've seen follow-on movements since then. That was taken on Friday. Obviously today it's thin market conditions, but we're seeing an extension lower below 110 in the euro dollar, for example. Home thoughts. Let me start with Joseph Conrad from The Heart of Darkness. We live as we dream alone. I'd like to thank the Australian High Commissioner and his wife for a lovely dinner on Friday night. Thank you. I'd also like to thank the UAE Ambassador for a lovely lunch at his residence by the forest and the river in Lataiga. I'll put up a photograph of the house. It's rather marvellous. And right up against the forest. And Nisha said to me, and please don't mention this to him, but she said, when we got down there, Ali Khan, the mobile signal was Kariobangi, and Kariobangi is deep in the heartland of the informal settlement structure in Nairobi, and wherever you live, whatever area, you're very close. But she was pointing out that he was remarkably close, but the forest was a beautiful sight. I thoroughly enjoyed myself at the Poponi School Speech Day, and they always have it in this sort of grand tent. I'll put up a photograph of it, and you see all these parents coming, and it's quite an event. Very ambitious children, I must admit, as well. Kenya picks colourful view at the beach in Shimoni just before a storm. Feel it, the storm just around here in Africa quite often. What presages the storm is a sharp uptick in the temperature. I said to the missus, darling, what do you think of this? You remember, on Friday I went for lunch at the Alliance Française, and I took a photograph of I'm going to put it up. And she says to me, it looks like a willy. And I said, it's actually an elephant. And then I met the artist in Zucchini and expressed my keenness on this particular sculpture. And now I think I obviously have a conversation piece when anyone visits. I'm going to ask them, well, what do you think that is? And see what they answer. Put up a photograph of it. Nairobi Now wrote a piece. It's part of an ongoing exhibition by Walied Osman, remade in Kenya until May the 31st. Haute Couture Recycled Functional Art Exhibition by Walied Osman, Afghan-American multimedia artist. Exhibits an array of artwork that are a deconstruction and reconstruction of old airplanes and cars. There you go, I met him in the fruit shop over the weekend. Wahhabis go nuclear, says Pepe Escobar. And it's a great article as ever, but let me just go to a couple of more pertinent points. Cue to gleaming Toyota convoys of caliphate goons laughing their Kalashnikovs off while they make their mark on the fluid and contested battlefield. The Pentagon may support anything they want with air power, but bombing won't disrupt the fluidity. The Pentagon has run out of targets. ISIS, ISIL, Daesh are not sitting ducks. They are an asymmetrical guerrilla, very apt redeploying in a flash. So now the stage is set for the Battle of Ramadi, remixed Shiite militias plus Sunni tribals, the odd American advisor, and discreet help from Iran and Russia against caliphate goons, many of them mercenaries lavishly supported by assorted wealthy Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia and across the Gulf. As far as the empire of chaos goes, divide and rule remains the sweetest game in town. And then I came across this in Counterpunch, very heavily redacted August 2012 7-page intelligence report. And listen to this. Defense Intelligence Agency confirmed the sectarian core of the Syrian insurgency. It says events are taking a clear sectarian direction. The Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and AQI are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. So hardly about democracy, I'm afraid. This analysis is in very sharp contrast with Western media and political elites, which had characterized the Syrian revolution as being driven by protesters in a quest for democracy and freedom. AQI supported the Syrian opposition from the beginning, both ideologically and through the media. AQI conducted a number of operations in several Syrian cities under the name Jaish al-Nusra. DIA confirmed that the Syrian insurgency was enabling the renewal of al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria. The report says there was a regression of AQI in the western provinces of Iraq during the years of 2009 and 2010. However, after the rise of the insurgency in Syria, the religious and tribal powers in the regions began to sympathize with the sectarian uprising. This sympathy appeared in Friday prayer sermons which called for volunteers to support the Sunnis in Syria. DIA predicted the Syrian government will survive, but foreign powers in the opposition will try to break off territory to establish an opposition capital, as was done in Libya. The report says the regime will survive and have control over Syrian territory. Opposition forces are trying to control the eastern areas adjacent to the western Iraqi provinces of Mosul and Anbar. In addition to neighboring Turkish borders, Western countries, the Gulf states, and Turkey are supporting these efforts. This hypothesis is most likely in accordance with the data from recent events, which will help prepare safe havens under the international sheltering, similar to what transpired in Libya when Benghazi was chosen as the command center of the temporary government. They also predicted the expansion of al-Qaeda and the declaration of the Islamic State 2 years before it happened. If the situation unravels, there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, and this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want in order to isolate the Syrian regime, which is considered the strategic depth of the Shia expansion in Iraq and Iran. The deterioration of the situation has dire consequences on the Iraqi situation. This creates the ideal atmosphere for AQI to return to its old pockets in Mosul and Ramadi, and will provide a renewed momentum under the presumption of unifying the jihad among Sunni Iraq and Syria and the rest of the Sunnis in the Arab world against what is considered one enemy, the dissenters. ISI could also declare an Islamic State through its union with other terrorist organizations in Iraq and Syria, which will create grave danger in regards to unifying Iraq and the protection of its territory. And the last prediction in the summer of 2012 is especially remarkable since it predates the actual declaration of the Islamic State by 2 years. Clearly extremely prescient piece. And then I came across this: US military actions belie the real agenda, which rather than combating ISIS is geared towards degradation of military capability of all sides. It's a trap for Iran if you consider how stretched they are now. Saying that, degradation of military capability of all sides, which is in effect support for ISIS. The fact is critical to understanding the true motivation of Washington in this campaign, namely inflicting maximum damage on both ISIS and Shiite militias fighting it. In effect, this controlled chaos strategy promotes and extends rather than concludes the war. And then an interesting piece in The Guardian. A Saudi official said, Iran said the key to the Arab world was Syria. Well, we agree with them. And this is now, just think of what I was just reading to you that was written in 2012. The leader, who asked that his unit not be identified, said he told his men that the grinding war of attrition they had fought against the Syrian government, this is a rebel leader, since early 2012 was about to turn in their favor. And the reason for that was that I could now get nearly all the weapons I wanted, he told the Observer. For the first time, they were not holding anything from us except anti-aircraft missiles. The Turks and their friends wanted this over with. And saying that the agreement had been secured by Saudi Arabia, which had resolved to do all it could to end the Bashar al-Assad regime. And that essentially King Salman called Erdogan, called Qatari officials and GCC leaders. And if you follow his Twitter handle, I noticed that for certain. His message was threefold. First, there was to be no more division along regional lines, which has seen the Muslim Brotherhood-aligned governments of Turkey and Qatar pour support into allied Syrian groups, while Saudi focused on more mainstream outfits. Second, Riyadh would agree to send game-changing weaponry to northern Syria in return for guarantees of coordination and discipline. And finally, the US would not stand in the way. Quite frankly, a Saudi official told The Observer, it would not have bothered us if they had tried to. Within weeks, the new push had paid clear dividends, armed with dozens of guided TOW anti-tank missiles which could put out regime armor from several miles away. Opposition groups, among them Al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria, Jabhat al-Nusra, which is prescribed by the US as a terror group and has long been viewed warily by Riyadh, started advancing into towns and cities that they had not dared to attack until then. The results were shocking. The regional capital of Idlib fell within days. Several weeks later, the nearby town of Jisr al-Shugur also fell to an amalgam of jihadists and moderates who had kept their end of the bargain. And I concluded by saying that Iran is now stretched really thin, really fine. It's going to snap at some point, which is probably the intention. And Assad is clearly very close to a tipping point, a negative tipping point as well. I saw this tweet from Wasil Ali, May the 13th, Syrian President Assad receives the credentials of the new Sudan envoy in Damascus. IS claims responsibility for bombing its Saudi mosque. And you know, this genie might escape its bottle, this IS genie, with regard to the Saudi royal family, who obviously feel that they're able to put them in and take them out when they wish. The fall of Ramadi and Palmyra on opposite ends of the vast territory controlled by Islamic State fighters were the militant group's biggest successes since the US-led coalition launched an air war to stop them. Obama on May the 22nd dismissed the fall of Ramadi as a tactical setback. And then we learned from the Syrian State News Agency that terrorists have killed more than 400 people and mutilated their bodies. This is in Palmyra. I'll put up a photograph that the BBC World tweeted. And then final bit of sort of news, cyber attack warning, could hackers bring down a plane, is the headline of a story in Der Spiegel. In modern airplanes, there are a whole series of back doors through which hackers can gain access to a variety of aircraft systems. The Spaniard's name is Hugo Tizo, and he now works for a data security firm based in Berlin. For the past several years, he has been commissioned by various companies to try to break into their computers and networks. But because Tizo is also a pilot, continues to hold a valid license, he has developed a reputation in the aviation industry as someone whose tech security warnings should be taken seriously. Tizo has demonstrated that you don't need a computer to hijack a plane remotely. A smartphone equipped with an app called Planesploit, which Tizo himself developed, could be enough. In theory, cyber terrorists could use such an app or something similar to take over a plane steering system and in a worst case scenario cause the plane to crash. That takes me back to MH370, and when I wrote, the signal announcing this new arrhythmic normal that I described, this world we live in now, was the disappearance of MH370. Since then, planes have been falling out of the sky like flies, I wrote, and the uncertainty around MH370 and MH17, which is sharpened by the way the story is seemingly turned off and on, took me back to Don DeLillo. We are now witnessing the flow of information, so much as pure spectacle. We are not witnessing the flow of information as much as pure spectacle or information made sacred, ritually unreadable. The small monitors of the office, home and car become a kind of idolatry here, where crowds might gather in astonishment. International markets, Friday, the core consumer price index climbed 0.3% in the US, which was the biggest gain since January 2013, and promptly rallied the dollar. If the economy, this is Janet Yellen, continues to improve as I expect, I think it will be appropriate at some point this year to take the initial step to raise the federal funds interest rate. And essentially that got all the dollar shorts scrambling. Euro is now at 109.61. It traded just above 110 earlier this morning. Dollar index was at 96.14 when I walked in. Sorry, 96.446, which is a 1 month high. Japanese yen 121.68 area, and that has really 121.65 area. That's trended lower of late, and quite dramatically in point of fact. Swissy, when I checked in the morning, 0.94285. The pound is at 154.82. Aussie 0.7826, Indian rupee 63.595, South Korean won 10.9826, Real considerably above 3, now at 309.47, and that was always going to happen. Egyptian pound 763.01, and the South African rand is now at around 11.95. I'll put up a 6-month chart of the dollar index, and I think the bull is very much back. The Bloomberg dollar spot index rose to the highest level since April 27th, and it rallied 2.6% last week, which was the most since September 2011. Euro dollar, I wrote earlier this morning, might drop like a stone. I'll put up a 3-month chart and have a look at this chart and have a look at this other chart, which sort of goes all the way back to when the euro began and points out various similarities between what is happening now and what happened then. The Shanghai Composite Index climbed 2.6%, headed for the highest close since January 2008. Now listen to this. The Chi-Next is valued at 115 times reported earnings, Shanghai Composite 24 times. Gold, when I checked last, was around the 1203.71 level. I think it's going lower. Put up a 3-month chart. Crude oil, well, that got to above 60. Last I checked, it was at 59.31. I think it's very, very toppy. Coming here to Africa, plenty to talk about. Elections in Ethiopia, but you know, the Ethiopian ruling party is set for a very easy victory. They have a vice-like grip, as Katrina Manson's written in the FT, on Africa's second most populous country. About a decade of double-digit growth, stable rule, a hugely attractive destination for foreign investors. Only one member of the 547-strong parliament is from the opposition. Most of these opposition parties are not serious parties. They're one-man parties. They're accomplices, gimmicks. There's a joke going round Addis ahead of election day highlighting the lack of genuine political competition. How many opposition MPs will they EPRDF allow to be elected? Rights groups have, however, been complaining about a press clampdown ahead of the elections, saying that the election cannot possibly be free or fair. This is the first general election since the death of Meles Zenawi, whose successor Haile Mariam Desalegn is almost certain to stay in office. 36.8 million Ethiopians registered to vote. Haile Mariam, very discreet, as you have to be when you're following such a leader like Meles. Some signs suggest his control of the security forces is low, one analyst of the Ethiopian government has said. Unlike many in the ruling elite, however, he was not part of the rebel movement which toppled Mengistu. Moving to Burundi, the Burundi opposition leader Ferruzzi was murdered. Gunmen wore uniforms like Nkurunziza's guards, but the presidency has denied any role. Zedi Feruzi, the head of the Union for Peace and Development, was walking home under police protection in Bujumburu's Ngagara district when he came under fire. The unknown gunmen were able to flee the scene in a car. The Independent put up this photograph. Leader of the UPD, Zingambinga, was killed in a drive-by shooting. By contrast, TSA Algérie was tweeting, Burundi impétable, le président candidat mène toujours campagne. They had a photograph of him campaigning. seemingly not too bothered. And then Harun Mutasa tweeted a photograph of the funeral for the opposition leader Zedi Furutsi, who was shot and killed on Saturday. The FT, there's a chap who writes in Beyond Bricks, and he's written something called A Guide to African Currencies, the Milk Index, and it's very good. And he's actually very interesting. But essentially talking about massive overvaluation of the Zambian kwacha and the Nigerian naira. The South African all-share edged 0.13% lower Friday. It's up 10.16% year to date, and has been particularly strong this year. SPAR close to signing deal in Zambia. But interesting perspective on South Africa. Consumers are under pressure, and it will continue to be the case, especially with no job creation here. There's load shedding and all these negative elements, he said. We thought we might be seeing some improvement, but it has proved short-lived. SPAR. Dollar rand, as I said, around the 11.95 level. I think we could see a big move higher through 12. Egyptian pound 763.01. Egyptian stock market is up 3.46% so far this year, but has rallied 10.423% since the 17th of May and the announcement that they were postponing the capital gains tax. In Nigeria, no fuel. Nigeria's biggest carrier, ARIC, grounds flights. It's operating only 1/3 of its schedule on Sunday, cancelled all domestic flights a day earlier as fuel shortages worsened. We're operating just a few flights today, maybe 30% of our normal operations. This is Ola Banji, a Lagos-based spokesman for Nigeria's biggest carrier. We could not operate domestic flights yesterday. And the Nigerian all-share, of course, is up 1.96% this year. Going back to that milk index estimates the naira is overvalued by 71% relative to its spot of 198 to the dollar. I couldn't agree more. AFP Africa tweeted Nigerians groan under biting petrol shortages over subsidy row. Put up this photograph. Somebody called Simret Zero. There shouldn't be fuel scarcity in a place where fuel comes from. Quite correct. The Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index is at a 10-month high and up 5.14% so far this year. Wall Street Journal is writing about African tourism being on the downturn, saying tourism was responsible for 11% of Kenya's GDP, more than 9% of South Africa's last year. My piece over the weekend is called Algorithms and Bear Markets. Did you know that many investors now trade algorithmically? These ultra-fast algorithms scan social media and the entire media platforms on the basis of words and sentiments, and they buy and sell stocks. Last week, if Nakumatt were listed at the Nairobi Securities Exchange and you were able to short it, Nakumatt would have been a short seller's dream. The hullabaloo that kicked off was uniformly negative, and folks were accusing Nakumatt of showing a different price on the shelf versus the price paid at the till. The accusation was one of a systemic and systematic price increase at the till versus the shelf. Not one tweet confirmed the reverse situation. The takeaway is either Nakumatt is complicit or it's clueless. Today we're no longer an island, and the brand and reputation impairment resonates worldwide. As you know, one component of our business is scanning the in real time, and last week the conversation about the shilling and the securities exchange turned seriously bearish. A bear market is described as a market condition in which the prices of securities are falling and widespread pessimism causes the negative sentiment to be self-sustaining. As investors anticipate losses in a bear market and selling continues, pessimism only grows. Although figures can vary, for many, a downturn of 20% or more in multiple broad market indices is considered an entry into a bear market. The shilling was trading above 97 on Friday. It's now at 97.50, which is a fresh 42-month low. In my opinion, the shilling is the best barometer of sentiment, and we're now in very choppy waters. A move through triple digits is less than 3% away, which is a margin of error in the very volatile financial markets of today. The shilling, which had been outperforming its sub-Saharan African peers, is now underperforming. The shilling made no headway in the last few weeks against the dollar at the time when the dollar was weak against the world. For example, the euro rallied 10% over that period against the dollar. I expect the dollar to turn stronger again, and much stronger. The equity indices have not yet met the 20% downturn threshold, that is the classic definition of a bear market. But the Nairobi All Share, while still plus 1.246% this year, has retreated 7.0925% since closing at a record on February the 25th. The NSE 20 is minus 4.55% in 2015, has retreated 619 points, or 11.267%, since closing at a multi-year high of 5,499. Price action is oftentimes a signal in the noise, and it's signaling weakness. Tricky times ahead, I'm afraid. And then Boniface Mwangi tweeted a story which I've spoken about previously, which was the story which was reported on May the 8th of this year. A Nakumatt auditor gunned down outside Nairobi office. That story is there. And there's also another article that Boniface Mwangi tweeted about Charterhouse Bank, a money laundering machine, written by Lorenzo Bagnoli and Lorenzo Bodrero on April the 16th, 2015. Very murky story. Kenya shilling, as I said, around the 97.50 level, and we got problems on the currency. Nairobi All Share has retreated 7.0925% since closing at a record on February the 25th. Ravi, who always tweets me when he sees a nice photograph, retweeted a photograph that Jackie Arkle took. Sarara camp in Samburu needs to be visited, and it's a lovely photograph, I must admit. EABL has introduced a herbal-flavoured, ready-to-drink spirit in the market, hoping to replicate its success that the brand has enjoyed in Nigeria since its introduction about 1.5 years ago. As I said, the NSE has been on a bear run. Let's see how things pan out today. Once again, thank you for stopping by.